Hello everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you two more bosses from our second set of Mythic tests here for the Sanctum of Domination, the new raid coming in patch 9.1. And if you were looking at the first two Mythic bosses and saying, hey, they don't look too hard, you would have been right, in the previous look. They weren't too hard. Well, today we see the wall. Yes, this is the wall boss, the big difficulty spike, which separates the little pug mythic groups that sort of dabble in, kill one or two bosses, and then leave from the real mythic raiders. So we'll see exactly how that goes down. First of all, a word from the sponsor of the channel this month, and then we will check out the Garrosh boss, Soulrender Dormazain. Before we dive into today's video though, I want to take 1 minute to talk to you about the sponsor of the video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for you to explore new skills, deepen existing passions, or just get lost in your creativity. And this month, although it's still quite rainy here in Ireland, unfortunately, I'm looking ahead with the Discover Your Next Summer Project playlist curated by Skillshare. And there's lots of different types of classes here, but I was very much drawn to the food ones this month. The perfect grilled cheese, a mini class to master the sandwich. Yes, please, I want to know. Or hey, I live in Ireland and we're still in lockdown here. I can't go to France or Italy to get some gelato. Well, never fear. Make your own gelato. Tips and recipes to make the delightful Italian frozen treat by Marie Asselin. Grazie, Marie. Now, Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can keep focused on deepening your skills or even exploring some new ones. Their premium membership is less than $10 a month with an annual subscription, and the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will actually get a free trial of that premium membership, so you can try out all the different classes for yourself. To paraphrase one of Skillshare's messages, there's nothing better than getting better, except grilled cheese. So go give Skillshare a try. Okay, the first boss we're looking at here on Mythic then is Soulrender Dormazain. And this is very similar, really, to how this boss actually works on heroic difficulty. It is the fifth boss in the raid. The big change on this fight, and in fact I believe in terms of mechanics the only change, is a new ad during the ad phase. So you still have the Moss-worn Agonizers spread around the room. These are casters that slowly walk towards Garrosh in the middle. They just spam cast a splash damage attack that targets random players. Quite a long cast time, quite easy to interrupt. The new ad is the Moss-worn Overlord. So this guy, he is bigger, he is a lot tankier, and his main mechanic is this AoE aura around him. It's actually extremely visible. It's this big circle around him, which infuses defiance into any ads within that circle. This is exceptionally dangerous. This makes any of those ads, i.e. the Moss-worn Agonizers, immune to all forms of crowd control, and it also increases their damage done by 200%. And from what I can see, if an Agonizer gets inside the Overlord circle, you're basically screwed, right? You are basically just dead. The Agonizer's normal cast, their Agonizing Spike, I think it's a big 10-yard splash. It's a pretty big splash targeted on a random person, and that does 10k damage in a splash. If you up that by 200%, that's 30,000 damage in a splash targeted at a random player. Unless you're ranged or all spread out, and you run literally zero melee players at all, this is just going to shred through your raid extremely quickly. And again, you cannot kick it, you cannot stun those ads if they're in that Overlord circle, so you're basically screwed. So the way to deal with this definitely is going to require specific specs and some pretty quick movement and coordination. Essentially, you see where all of the Agonizers are going to spawn in. They spawn in first, and then you see this big sort of summoning swirly, which is where the Overlord is going to come in. It is essential that all of the Agonizers are moved away from where that Overlord is going to spawn in. That is the big thing. So Death Knight grips, knockbacks, Disc Priests or Holy Priests even as well, both bring a knockback. Balance Druids bring knockbacks. Any sort of spec that can do that, Marksmanship Hunters, whatever, Ring of Peace for monks, that is going to be 100% essential. You need that. You need to have them all knocked away so that when that Overlord spawns in, none of those ads are kept in his circle. And what happens then is some DPS checks, right? So first of all, you've got 2 target cleave DPS check. You need to bring the boss on top of the Overlord and 2 target cleave them down, kill off the Overlord. Once that's done, you can bring the boss on top of all of the other Mossworn Agonizers and then do a big AoE cleave to kill them off. And really my main concern with this comes from the question of class stacking, right? Because you can see the layout of the fight. You can see how these ads spawn. They're super spread out. In theory, the easiest way to deal with it by far, right, is let's say the Overlord is going to spawn in the left-hand side of the room. You have a couple of Druids Typhoon the Agonizers away from the left-hand side of the room. You then have, let's say, a Blood Death Knight, Mass Grip, all of the Agonizers together. So you have them all stacked up together. The other tank, meanwhile, takes the boss on top of the Overlord. You 2-target cleave it down. And you have 2 of these brands up at all times as well. The Brands of Torment, which slow any of the Mossworn that they touch and increase their damage taken by 50%. So you put one of those brands on the Agonizer clump, and you put one of those brands on the Overlord. And that would basically make every single ad be slowed, every single ad be taking increased damage. And in the meantime, you have specs that can do that split cleave going pretty much absolutely ham, right? So I'm thinking of Affliction Warlocks here that can dot up the boss and the Overlord. And then also, you know, AoE drop some Seeds of Corruption in on top of all of those Agonizers stacked together and just cleave everything down like crazy. Balanced Druids are going to be nutty here. In fact, Balanced Druids can do really good split cleave on everything, even if they aren't perfectly stacked up. Well, they also bring the Typhoons and the knockbacks, all that sort of stuff too. Certainly with our group, we didn't have that coordination. We weren't stacking up these ads together. What happened when these ads weren't stacked together? It was really difficult to actually kill everything, right? The DPS efficiency just isn't there to kill everything, which meant that some of these Agonizers would actually live to the next set of Agonizers coming in. It did seem that if they lived long enough, they might even turn into a second Overlord as well, so you'd have 2 Overlords at once, which means you're basically insta-wiping at that point. There's almost no way to keep the Agonizers out of 2 of those circles at the same time and to kill both Overlords at the same time. But yeah, basically ad control is the name of the game here. It really is the name of the game on this fight. Grouping the ads effectively, getting Brands of Torment on those ads for boosted damage to get efficient DPS out, kill the ads off quickly, well controlled, whilst also then being able to get good cleave damage onto the boss himself and actually kill the boss. I mean, you'll see in the footage, we're doing very little damage to the boss. We are not getting him down too quickly at all. But that's really important because the timings between these waves coming in is quite tight. That was one thing that worked really well here on Mythic. It's a lot more intense, right? Because of that DPS check, this fight works much better. On Heroic, it was kind of boring. On Mythic, though, things flow in a lot more. So again, when you've got Torment coming in, which is where all those pizza slices start filling up, and you have to find the one safe pizza slice to escape, that's bad news because, well, I mean, you can't be applying Brands of Torment to a bunch of ads if they're in one of the dangerous pizza slices, right? You have to get out of there, which means that you're going to lose efficiency in terms of killing those ads, and you might start falling behind. Likewise, snapping the chains that that are chained to Garrosh, stopping him from doing his Hell Scream attack. That also is going to be happening whilst you are killing these ads and whilst you have all of this sort of control happening. So there's actually a lot more overlaps in terms of mechanics, and executing them cleanly, properly, matters a lot. I think it's a pretty nice Mythic boss for a mid-tier in that sense. Again, my main concern with this fight is literally class stacking. Like, let's be real. Death Knights are nuts here. Necrolord Death Knights, with their ability to group things up with their grips. I mean, Blood DK goes a step further on that one. Even just the single target grips from Death Knights are going to be super useful. Balanced Druids with their split cleave that they can do at Starfall, and also the knockbacks are going to be extremely useful too. I presume you could actually Ursol's Vortex the Agonizers as well. Stuff like that. Everything like that is going to be kind of insane. Worth noting as well that the healers felt that there really wasn't too much to heal. Most of the damage seemed to be avoidable. Getting kicks on the ads wasn't very hard. And yeah, just being able to efficiently kick the ads, again, removes most of that damage. It's avoidable. What you're really looking for as the healers is having just big throughput and big damage reduction CDs on the chain snaps. Like, I would say Disc Priest stands out to me. Holy Priest even would work as well, super well. They stand out to me as being pretty good healers here because they have knockbacks. with Shining. It's called Shining Force. I think it's called Shining Force. I'm suddenly doubting myself, but they have those knockbacks. They can talent into it, and then they also have really good burst healing CDs with longer cooldowns to deal with these chain snaps. So I mean, like a Holy Word Salvation running through those chain snaps is just so much throughput. Powered Barrier with Evangelism, again, so much throughput, loads of damage reduction. So yeah, that's the sort of thing that I think is certainly worth considering. I mean, our testing team was even throwing around the idea that they could simply 3-heal the fight, that it was, it was that undertuned in terms of damage, and then get more damage out, kill off the ads quicker, which is sort of the point to look for. So there you go, guys. Soulrender Dormazain, cool boss with a lot of concerns as to which actual specs you're bringing. It's the 5th boss in the raid, so it's not going to be too difficult, but it's probably going to be difficult enough that that sort of stuff does actually matter. So there you go. Let me know what you think. Let's look at the next one. All right, everyone. Next up, we have the 9. This is the 3rd boss. While you're watching this footage, remember, this is the 3rd boss of the raid. And this is the wall. Ladies and gentlemen, the wall has been found. What a step up in difficulty. What an insane step up in difficulty from the first 2 mythic bosses which we tested last time. Wow is all I have to say. Is wow. You'll probably cruise through those first 2 and you're going to have a lot of progress on this boss. This one is nasty. So what has changed here? We didn't even see the entire fight. I will be honest with you. We didn't see much of the second half of the fight. So there's that whole section to contend with as well. I'll obviously explain what would happen there. But coming into this first of all, Fragments of Destiny is now going to occur in phase 1 as well. On Heroic, this only occurs in the second part of the fight after you've killed off the first 2 bosses. There's also more Fragments of Destiny here. So what does this do? Again, Mythic, you've got 20 people in the raid. 4 people are going to get this Fragment of Destiny debuff on them. It's going to be ticking for damage. Whenever you dispel it, it will jump onto the nearest player to them. When you get all stacks on a single player, and you dispel that player, it will then drop a permanent pool on the ground for the rest of the fight that will put a massive slow and also do damage to anyone that tries to walk through it. How should this be dealt with? Well, not, in my opinion, in the way that we were dealing with it at all with the test group, which is, I think, why we're struggling. I was definitely tossing around a number of different ways in terms of how to deal with this most efficiently. So, I mean, one theory, which I think is very hard to execute, and therefore I don't think it's going to be really that viable for most groups, is the mass dispel strategy, where you'd have one person stand on a marker, and then you'd have the other 3 people form a triangle around them, positioned in such a way that when those people are dispelled, or you just drop a mass dispel and all of the things jump onto the middle person. Honestly, I'm not even sure if that works. You might need to make a square around someone who doesn't have the debuff, so that when it's mass dispelled, the 4 dots jump onto the middle person, and then they get single target dispel to drop the thing. I think that seems, honestly, a bit too difficult to actually make happen without losing a bunch of damage. I don't think that's going to be the way. I think the strategy for this is quite simple. You just tank the 2 bosses over near the edge of the room, and effectively you do a little lineup, right? So what happens is, let's say everyone is stacked underneath the bosses, beside the bosses, the debuffs go out, and let's say that they're marked, let's just say, for the sake of making it a clearer explanation, 1, 2, 3, 4. So player 1, player 4 would step out of the raid, right? So the debuffs come out, player 4 moves out of the raid, and they're going to wait there for a while. Player 1 moves over to player 4. They get single target dispelled. They come back to the raid. Player 2 then goes out, gets dispelled, comes back in. Player 3 goes out, gets dispelled, comes back in. You now have all of the debuffs on player 4. Player 4 runs to the edge of the room. They run a bit further out. They get dispelled. They come back in. The thing is dropped, and you're good, right? So basically, I mean, 4 healers is presumably the standard here. So you have each of your healers assigned as dispel 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you just call it out, and players have to go out, just file out, just one by one, go out, get dispelled. The 4th player in this circumstance, the person who is receiving all of these debuffs, is going to require quite a bit of single target healing, right? Every single time that debuff is applied, it gets an extra stack. It ticks even harder. So that is obviously a concern. They might need to run defensives, externals, spot healing, that sort of thing. But I think this is probably the best way to deal with it. Again, you don't even need them to stand outside of the raid, right? For example, you could have, say, the 2 tanks tanking the bosses at 12 o'clock on a clock. Then you have the rest of the entirety of the raid stacked at 6 o'clock, so they're able to hit the bosses in the back. And then you simply have player number 4, when the debuffs come out, move to 3 o'clock, right? They move to east on the compass, as it were. So they're still in range to hit the boss, especially if they're melee. They can still backstab them, but they're separate from the rest of the group so that when the players go out one by one to get dispelled, it's easy to just jump it across, and you're not going to get the debuff jumping to someone it's not supposed to. As you'll see from the footage here, our group was trying to running halfway across the room, which is no, I mean, I just don't think that's a good idea at all. So much damage is lost. It's just not a good idea. So I really think that, just having the single target dispels, again, just one by one, moving very slightly outside of the main group to get those things onto the player, and then that player just jumps out, whatever, heroic leap out, get dispelled, charge back in. Very easy to place those things then where you want to. I think that has to be the play. So much simpler. But that's a lot of coordination, to be fair. That's a lot of coordination. For the third mythic boss, you need a coordinated list of dispels. It actually, in fact, reminds me a lot of dispelling on Mythic Queen Ashara, which is an end boss. It reminds me a lot of that. Now, that was a lot more difficult because you're playing around line of sight. You had to have warlocks dispelling with imps and stuff like that. That was a lot more complicated. But nonetheless, it is somewhat similar. Good news as well is the boss's push and pull effects are now working, which is good, and those felt pretty solid, right? So one boss will attempt to push you away for about, 8 seconds or something, and then after 8 seconds, anyone who's not near to the boss explodes, so you have to fight against the push, get close to her. The other boss does the opposite, tries to pull you in, then she explodes and does a massive chunk of damage, probably one-shots, I guess, anyone that's near her. So again, you have to fight against the pull and just move out. It's not too difficult, to be honest, but it is something that you have to watch out for, and obviously that can easily overlap with the dispels, which makes those more difficult. So that's an interesting overlap to have to contend with. This also makes the 9 mechanics, let's call them, or the 6 mechanics, also more intense. These are the kitchen sink mechanics I talked about in the heroic video. So you got like the massacre lines coming in. You've got soaks that need to happen, 4 big purple or little purple soaks around the room that need to be stood in by one person each. All that sort of stuff. All that stuff is still happening, still going on. And again, that gets more intense while you're trying to coordinate dispels, while you're trying to kill an ad. There's a blob ad that needs to be kicked, interrupted, stunned, CC'd, gripped under the bosses, nuked down. One of the bosses has a bunch of spells that need to be kicked as well. They do some crazy damage to you. There's a lot going on here. It does seem as well the kitchen sink mechanics are happening a bit more frequently, that they're building up to more of a crescendo more quickly. There's just more overlaps, it felt like, compared to heroic. And I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's how it felt. So I imagine that probably is the case, and that certainly as you get towards the end of the fight, that this is going to be really intense. You're going to have loads of these things overlapping each other at once. All that stuff, that's hard. That takes coordination. This is a proper mythic boss. I actually think it's fantastic. I am a little bit worried that this is perhaps too difficult for a third boss. This might be more appropriate as like the 5th, 6th, 7th boss. It would be pretty good for those, actually, I think. I mean, we'll have to see, but this is certainly epic. I mean, personally, I love it. I think this boss is awesome. This is possibly the boss I've been most impressed with so far. There's just so much stuff going on. For specs on this fight, definitely, cleave is king. For the first part of the fight, there's 2 bosses. One of the bosses spawns in an ad, so you're talking 2 to 3 target cleave for that entire section. Then when the bosses get to, 10%, 15% health, whenever one of them reaches that point, the third boss arrives. So at that point, you're doing 3 to 4 target cleave. And that's going to be pretty nasty. Probably Bloodlust at that point when the third boss arrives in to finish off the first 2 bosses. That's going to be a huge difficulty spike halfway through the fight, which we did not get to. But yeah, cleave is huge at that point. Once that's done, then it's a single target fight, pure single target. So this should be an interesting one. I could certainly see like something like Assassination Rogue. Seems like it should be really good here. Assassination Rogue should be really, really good, where they're going to have strong 2 target, and then they're also going to have extremely strong single target and very strong execute damage to take down that the phase 2, where it should be sort of ramping in difficulty. I mean, we'll see. Perhaps it is the case that once you get those first 2 bosses dead, that the second half of the fight is actually fairly easy. Not sure, to be honest. Not really sure. Certainly as the third boss in the raid, I mean, you're mostly just killing it for loot. If you're a serious Mythic guild, you don't really care too much about class stacking or anything like that. Certainly for pug groups, with this boss being the wall, if you're realistically looking to kill this on a pug group, my best guess right now is that it probably will emphasize cleave damage. Like specs that can do really good cleave to targets that are stacked up. You know, fire, like mages, fire mage, frost mage seems really good for that. Death knights could be really good, that sort of thing. I suspect that that is probably what you're looking for, and that I'm guessing that the single target part of the fight is going to be much, much easier. And there you go, guys. Boss 3 and Boss 5 both looked at for Mythic raid testing. With ironically, I would say Boss 3 looks probably harder than Boss 5, I think. But yeah, I thought both of these bosses are actually better on Mythic. Both these bosses seem really cool on Mythic. I'm really, really happy with them. I was a little bit worried, honestly, after last week and seeing the Eye of the Jailer on Mythic and going, uh-oh, this fight is worse. This fight is kind of sucks, honestly, on Mythic. So really happy this week to come in and see that these two bosses have been improved a lot, especially Soulrender Dormazain, who, while being fine on Heroic, he was fine. Certainly wasn't an exciting boss. I think that the overlaps and managing the ads is better on Mythic, though there is definitely still a concern, I feel, for spec balance for that fight. It's really the big question mark. It's a cool fight, but class spec comp requirements could be a little bit stringent. And then we have the Nine, which is just super intense. It's a fantastic boss, really awesome. Spooky as the third boss of the raid. Very, very spooky. So we'll see. I mean, maybe it will have to be tuned quite a lot. I suspect that either way, this is going to be a big, big wall boss because there are just simply so many mechanics here. I think it's pretty intense, pretty intimidating. I'd almost prefer if it was like the 7th or 8th boss. I think it would be amazing for that, would be my thoughts. But anyway, this is where it is. It is the third. Thanks for watching, everyone. I will catch you next time. It's going to be pretty soon. Because we do have Mythic raid testing again tonight as I'm recording this video. So I will see you guys for that one as well. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.